Most people spend their entire lives waiting. They wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, and repeat. They are told that if they save a little every month, invest in a retirement fund, and wait patiently for 40 years, they will one day be wealthy. But here is the uncomfortable truth that almost nobody talks about. By the time that wealth arrives, if it ever does, most of those people are too old, too tired, or too sick to truly enjoy it. Their best years are already gone. Their energy is spent. Their dreams have quietly faded into the background of a life lived on someone else's terms. This is the slow lane. And for millions of people around the world, it is the only road they were ever shown. MJ DeMarco, the author of the Millionaire Fastlane, lived this frustration personally. He grew up without wealth, without powerful connections, and without any inherited advantage. He watched others drive expensive cars past him while he stood waiting at a bus stop in the cold, wondering how they got there. That moment changed something inside him. He did not accept the standard answer of work hard, save money, and wait. He went looking for a different road entirely. What he found, and what he built his life and this book around, is a completely different way of thinking about money, time, and wealth creation. This is not a book about saving more aggressively. It is not about cutting out your morning coffee or skipping vacations. It is a book about questioning the entire system you were handed and deciding whether you want to follow it blindly or design something far better. For investors, for entrepreneurs, for anyone who has ever looked at their bank account and felt a quiet frustration that their effort is not translating into the kind of life they imagined, this summary is a deep exploration of the ideas, the mindset, and the strategy that can genuinely change the outcome. Let us begin at the very foundation. DeMarco opens with a powerful distinction. He says there are essentially three financial roads that people travel in life, and most people never realize they have chosen one by default. The first road is the sidewalk. The second road is the slow lane. The third road is the fast lane. Each of these is not just a financial strategy. Each one is a complete philosophy, a way of seeing the world, and a pattern of behavior that compounds over time into a very specific kind of life. The sidewalk is where most of the world lives without ever knowing it. Sidewalkers are not necessarily poor people. In fact, many sidewalkers earn large salaries, but they spend everything they earn, often more than they earn. They live for today with almost no regard for tomorrow. Their financial decisions are driven entirely by immediate pleasure, by social status, by the desire to appear successful rather than to actually become successful. They buy expensive things they cannot afford because it makes them feel a certain way. They have no savings, no investments, no plan. When an emergency arrives, and emergencies always arrive, they are completely unprepared. They borrow money to fix one problem, which creates another problem, which requires more borrowing, which creates a cycle that becomes almost impossible to escape without a dramatic change in behavior. Imagine a young professional earning a respectable income in a major city. He drives a car that costs more than his annual savings, wears clothing brands that consume a significant portion of his monthly income, and goes on vacations that are fully paid for with credit. He looks successful. His social media reflects a life of comfort and pleasure. But underneath that surface, he has almost nothing. No assets, no investments, no financial cushion. If his job disappeared tomorrow, his entire world would collapse within weeks. That is the sidewalk. And it is far more common than most people are willing to admit. This is where most beginners make their first major mistake. They confuse appearing wealthy with being wealthy. They optimize their life for how it looks rather than what it actually produces. The sidewalk is seductive because the rewards are immediate and visible. The consequences are delayed and invisible, until suddenly they are not. The slow lane is different. Slow laners are not irresponsible. In fact, they are often praised by society as the responsible ones. They go to school, get a good education, find a stable job, Contribute to their pension or retirement fund every month. Avoid unnecessary debt. Live within their means, and patiently wait for the magic of compound interest to eventually make them rich. This is the conventional wisdom. This is what financial advisors, parents, and television commercials have been telling people for decades. But DeMarco makes a deeply important argument against the slow lane, and it is an argument that every investor needs to sit with carefully. The slow lane trades the most irreplaceable resource you have, which is time, in exchange for a financial reward that arrives so late in life that its utility is dramatically reduced. Think about what you want wealth for. You want it for freedom. You want it for experiences. You want it to take care of the people you love. You want it to wake up each morning and choose how to spend your day. But the slow lane delivers all of this, if it delivers it at all, somewhere around the age of 60 or 65. By that point, your physical health may be limited. Your parents may be gone. Your children are grown and living their own lives. The adventures you dreamed of in your 20s are now physically challenging or no longer appealing. You have the money, finally, but the life you wanted to spend it on has already passed. There is another deeply uncomfortable variable in the slow lane that most people do not calculate honestly. The slow lane is built on an assumption of stability that simply does not exist in the real world. It assumes you will stay employed. It assumes markets will perform well over your working lifetime. It assumes your health will hold. It assumes your industry will not be disrupted by technology, automation, or economic shifts. These are enormous assumptions, and history has shown, repeatedly, that for millions of people, at least one of these assumptions fails. When it does, the entire slow lane plan collapses. Imagine a person who spent 25 years carefully contributing to a retirement fund, building a modest investment portfolio, living frugally and responsibly. Then, a health crisis hits at 52. Or, the industry they built their career in gets disrupted by technology and their skills become obsolete. Or, a market crash wipes out a significant portion of what they built. The slow lane does not protect against these realities. It simply hopes they will not happen. This is why this matters in real investing. When you understand the fragility of the slow lane, you begin to see that the real risk is not in being bold. The real risk is in being passive for too long. The greatest financial danger for most people is not that they tried something and it did not work. It is that they never tried anything at all, trusted a system that was never truly designed with their best interests at heart, and ran out of time before they ran out of hope. Now, we arrive at the fast lane, and this is where the book truly begins to open up. The fast lane is not about getting rich quickly through shortcuts, scams, or gambling. DeMarco is absolutely clear about this. He is not selling lottery tickets or pyramid schemes. The fast lane is a specific philosophy built around creating real value for large numbers of people in ways that generate income without requiring your constant direct time and labor. It is about building systems, not just earning salaries. It is about owning things that produce wealth, rather than simply renting your time to someone else's machine. The foundational insight of the fast lane is this: wealthy people do not trade time for money. Wealthy people build or acquire systems that generate money whether they are working or not. This is sometimes called passive income, but DeMarco goes much deeper than that phrase typically suggests. He is not just talking about putting money in a dividend stock and collecting small checks. He is talking about building businesses, products, platforms, and systems that serve large numbers of people and scale independently of your personal hours. To understand why this matters so deeply, you need to understand one equation that DeMarco places at the center of everything. Wealth is not primarily about your income. Wealth is about the relationship between three things. The first is the number of people you serve. The second is the value you provide to each of those people. The third is how much of that value you capture in return. The more people you reach, And the more genuine value you create for them, the greater your potential for wealth. This is why a software application can create more wealth for its creator than 40 years of professional employment. The software serves thousands or millions of people simultaneously. The professional serves one employer at a time. This insight changes everything about how you think about investing, building, and creating. It shifts your focus from how many hours you can work to how many people you can serve, from how much your time is worth per hour to how much your system produces per day, from optimizing your career to building something that operates beyond you. Imagine a founder who creates a simple mobile application that helps small business owners manage their customer communications. She spends 6 months building it. She charges a small monthly subscription fee. As word spreads and the user base grows, she begins earning consistent monthly revenue from thousands of subscribers who never required her to personally serve each one of them. She is not trading her hours for that income. She built something once, improved it continuously, and it serves people at scale. That is the fast lane at work in its most accessible form. If you are starting today, begin by thinking about what you know, what problems you see in the world around you, and who is experiencing those problems. Then ask yourself whether there is a way to create a solution that can reach and serve those people without you personally being present for every transaction. This question, more than any other, is the beginning of fast lane thinking. Now, DeMarco introduces what he calls the commandments of the fast lane. These are not just rules. They are filters. They help you evaluate any business idea, investment opportunity, or income strategy to determine whether it actually has the potential to create significant wealth quickly, or whether it is simply another version of the slow lane dressed up in exciting language. There are 5 commandments, and together, they form a framework that every serious investor should keep at the forefront of their mind. The first commandment is the commandment of need. This one is both simple and deeply misunderstood. DeMarco says that money follows value, and value is created by solving real problems that real people have. He is very explicit about what this means in practical terms. Building a business around something you are passionate about is not enough. Building a business around something you find interesting is not enough. The market does not care about your passion. The market pays for solutions to its problems. So the question you must always begin with is not what do I love doing, but what do people genuinely need that is not yet being served well. This distinction is where enormous amounts of investor capital and entrepreneurial energy are wasted every single year. People fall in love with their idea. They believe in it deeply. They invest money, time, and emotional energy into it. But if the idea is not solving a real problem for a meaningful number of people, the market will not respond. And without market response, there is no revenue. And without revenue, there is no wealth. The passion was real. The effort was real. But the need was either not real or not large enough to generate the kind of returns that justify the investment. This is why this matters in real investing. Before you commit capital or energy to any opportunity, you must honestly answer whether there is a genuine, validated need. Not a need you believe exists, not a need that seems logical, an actual need that you can demonstrate through evidence, through data, through early customer behavior, through existing market signals. Investors who skip this step consistently waste resources on solutions to problems that no one is actually trying to solve. Think about the investors who poured capital into dozens of technology companies during various market bubbles, companies that had fascinating technology, enthusiastic founders, and compelling presentations, but no clear answer to the question of who specifically needed this and why they would pay for it. When the market tested those answers in the real world, many of those companies simply dissolved. The technology was sometimes genuinely impressive, but impressive technology that does not solve a prioritized human need does not generate sustainable revenue. Imagine a startup building an advanced social platform for a demographic that already has multiple well-established social platforms meeting all their connection needs. The team is brilliant. The design is beautiful. The pitch is compelling. But no one was urgently waiting for another option in that space. The need was not there with sufficient intensity. Capital flowed in based on excitement rather than genuine need analysis, and the result was entirely predictable. If you are starting today, before you invest a single unit of currency or a single week of effort into any venture, ask three questions with complete honesty. First, what specific problem does this solve? Second, who specifically experiences that problem, and how much does it cost them in time, money, or pain? Third, is there evidence that people are already seeking a solution to this problem? If you cannot answer all three clearly, you are not yet ready to invest. The second commandment is the commandment of entry. This one is counterintuitive for many people. DeMarco argues that if an opportunity is extremely easy to enter, if there are no significant barriers, if anyone can do it with minimal skill or capital, then that opportunity is unlikely to produce significant wealth. The reason is simple. When something is easy for everyone to do, everyone does it. And when everyone does it, the market becomes saturated, competition drives prices and margins down, and the only people who profit are typically those who entered very early or those at the top of the distribution. This does not mean you should look for opportunities that are needlessly complicated or inaccessible. It means you should expect that real wealth creation requires something that not everyone has or is willing to develop. That something might be specialized knowledge. It might be a specific skill that took years to develop. It might be proprietary technology. It might be a unique network of relationships. It might be capital. It might be simply the patience to do the hard, unglamorous work that most people abandon before it produces results. Whatever form it takes, the barrier is what protects the return. Think about why professional investors spend enormous energy on due diligence before deploying capital into a business. Part of what they are evaluating is precisely this. Does this business have a moat? Is there something that makes it difficult for competitors to simply replicate what they are doing? If the answer is no, if the entire model can be copied by anyone with a laptop and an internet connection, then the competitive advantage is temporary at best. Today's profitable niche becomes tomorrow's crowded commodity market. The commandment of entry also applies to career and skill building. If the skill you are developing can be learned by anyone in a weekend, it will be valued accordingly. The skills that produce extraordinary income are almost always the ones that require sustained effort, specialized knowledge, and practice that most people give up before they complete. This is not discouraging. This is actually one of the most empowering truths in wealth building. The barrier that frustrates most people is precisely what rewards the few who persist through it. Imagine two people learning to invest. The first person reads a few popular books, opens a trading account, and begins buying and selling based on general tips from financial media. The second person spends 3 years deeply studying financial analysis, learning to read balance sheets with genuine sophistication, studying economic cycles, building relationships with other serious investors, and developing a proprietary framework for evaluating opportunities. Both people are investing, but only one has built something that not everyone can easily replicate. And over time, that difference compounds into a dramatic difference in outcomes. This is where most beginners make a critical mistake. They look for the easiest path in. They want the opportunity with the lowest barrier, because lower barrier feels like lower risk. But in wealth creation, low barrier almost always means low return. The real risk mitigation comes not from choosing easy opportunities, but from developing genuine competence that gives you an edge in evaluating and executing the harder ones. The third commandment is the commandment of control. This one speaks directly to the heart of what separates building wealth from participating in someone else's wealth building. DeMarco is emphatic. You cannot achieve fast lane wealth if someone else controls the most critical variables in your financial equation. If your income depends entirely on a salary that someone else sets and can reduce or eliminate at any moment. You do not control your financial destiny. If your business depends entirely on a single platform, a single supplier, or a single customer relationship, you do not control your financial destiny. If your investment returns depend entirely on decisions made by people who do not have your best interests as their primary concern, you do not control your financial destiny. Control is not just about power in some abstract sense. Control is about optionality. When you control the key variables in your wealth building equation, you have the ability to respond, adapt, adjust, and accelerate in ways that are simply not available to you when control rests with others. You can change pricing, you can pivot your model, you can exit a position, double down on a winning strategy, or protect yourself from a deteriorating situation. When someone else controls those decisions, you are a passenger, not a driver. And passengers, no matter how intelligent or hardworking, arrive at wherever the driver decides to take them. For investors specifically, this commandment has profound implications. There is a meaningful difference between being a passive investor who places capital with a fund manager and then waits, and being an active investor who deeply understands where their capital is deployed, why, and what the exit conditions are. Both approaches have their place, but the investor who has given away all meaningful control over their capital to others is exposed to risks they may not fully understand and cannot influence. The fund manager's incentives are not identical to the investor's interests. The platform that hosts your investment activity has its own commercial priorities. The regulatory environment can change. The investor who understands this and builds genuine knowledge and optionality around their portfolio is in a fundamentally stronger position than one who simply trusts and waits. This is why this matters in real investing. Overdependence on any single entity, whether that is an employer, a fund manager, a technology platform, or a single asset class, is a structural vulnerability. Wealth building requires not just growth, but resilience. The investor who creates genuine control over their financial life builds a structure that can withstand shocks that would devastate those who have surrendered that control. Imagine a small business owner who has built a profitable operation over 5 years. Her entire distribution runs through a single large platform. One morning, that platform changes its algorithm or adjusts its fee structure, and her revenue drops dramatically overnight. She had been building wealth on a foundation she did not control, and the platform exercised that control in a direction that served its interests, not hers. This scenario plays out constantly in the real business world and in investing. The lesson is not to avoid platforms or partnerships. The lesson is to always be building your own assets, your own relationships, your own channels, alongside whatever larger structures you participate in. The fourth commandment is the commandment of scale. This is perhaps the most mathematically important concept in the entire book for investors. DeMarco explains that the size of your wealth is largely determined by the scale of your reach. To create significant wealth, you need to be able to serve not just a small local group, but potentially a national or global audience. The more people you can serve with your product, service, or value proposition, the greater the potential financial return. This is the mathematics of wealth that most traditional financial education completely ignores. A professional who earns an income is fundamentally constrained by the number of hours available in a working lifetime. Even the highest paid professionals face this ceiling. But a business that serves millions of people, a product that is downloaded globally, a platform that processes thousands of transactions daily, these are not constrained by individual hours. They scale. And scale is what transforms good income into genuine wealth. Think about why investors pay such high valuations for scalable technology businesses compared to equally profitable but locally constrained service businesses. A restaurant that earns strong profits from its physical location earns those profits only in that location. A software company that earns strong profits from its product can in theory serve every person on Earth with the same codebase. The scalability of the model fundamentally changes the wealth creation potential even when current earnings are similar. For investors evaluating opportunities, scale potential is one of the most important questions to ask. Can this business serve 10 times its current customer base without a corresponding tenfold increase in costs? Can it expand geographically without rebuilding from scratch in every new market? Does its value proposition translate across cultures and economies? Is there a network effect that makes the product more valuable as more people use it? These are the questions that separate businesses that can create extraordinary wealth from those that are simply good at generating moderate income. Imagine an investor looking at two early-stage companies. The first company provides a specialized consulting service to manufacturing businesses. It is profitable and growing, but each new client requires dedicated expert hours, which means growth requires hiring, which creates cost growth that closely tracks revenue growth. The second company provides a software platform that automates the same consulting analysis. It requires significant upfront investment to build, but once built, it can serve each additional customer at a dramatically lower marginal cost. The first business might be a very good business, but the second business has a fundamentally different scale potential, and that difference, over time, creates an entirely different wealth outcome for investors. If you are starting today, evaluate every opportunity through the lens of scale. Ask yourself whether the thing you are building or investing in has a ceiling defined by human hours, or whether it has a ceiling defined primarily by market size. The first type of opportunity can create a good life. The second type of opportunity can create generational wealth. The fifth commandment is the commandment of time, and this one is where DeMarco ties together the entire framework with an insight that is both simple and profound. He argues that true wealth, Fastlane wealth, requires building income and asset structures that are increasingly independent of your direct time and labor. The goal is not just to earn more money. The goal is to build systems that generate money, whether you are sleeping, traveling, or spending time on whatever matters most to you. This is the difference between income and wealth. Income requires your presence. Income requires your time. The moment you stop working, the income stops flowing. Wealth continues to generate returns even when you are not actively working. This distinction is everything. It is the entire reason that a business owner who has built a well-run company with strong systems and a capable team is wealthier in the truest sense than a highly paid professional who earns 3 times as much but whose income disappears the moment they stop showing up. For investors, this commandment reinforces the importance of thinking about every investment in terms of its time requirement. An investment that generates strong returns but requires constant monitoring, active management, and daily decision-making is not truly passive wealth. It has simply transformed your labor from one form into another. The investments that create genuine freedom are those that can be managed with a reasonable time commitment while continuing to generate returns. This is not laziness. This is strategic design. Every hour you free from active income generation is an hour you can spend building more systems, acquiring more assets, deepening your knowledge, or simply living the life that wealth was meant to enable. Now, let us move into one of the most psychologically important sections of DeMarco's framework. He spends significant energy on what he calls the wealth equation, but even more on the beliefs and mental frameworks that determine whether someone is capable of walking the fast lane or not. Because the truth is that the fast lane is not primarily a technical challenge. It is a psychological one. Most people are operating from a set of beliefs about money that were installed in them during childhood and reinforced throughout their adult lives by media, social pressure, and cultural norms. These beliefs feel like facts because they are so deeply embedded. But they are not facts. They are assumptions, and many of them are directly interfering with the ability to create real wealth. One of the most pervasive of these beliefs is the equation between hard work and wealth. Most people genuinely believe that if they work hard enough for long enough, they will eventually become wealthy. This belief is emotionally compelling because it feels fair. It suggests that wealth is a meritocratic reward for effort. But DeMarco challenges this directly. He points out that the world is full of people who work extraordinarily hard and never achieve meaningful wealth. The laborer who works 12-hour days in physically demanding conditions is working harder in one sense than almost any executive or investor. But hard work alone, without leverage, without scale, without the right vehicle, produces fatigue and moderate income, not wealth. This does not mean that laziness is a wealth strategy. DeMarco is not dismissing effort. He is redirecting it. He is saying that effort applied to the wrong vehicle, no matter how intense or sustained, will not produce the results you are seeking. The question is not how hard are you working. The question is, what are you building with your effort, and does it have the potential to scale beyond your personal time? This is where most people make the most consequential mistake of their financial lives. They apply extraordinary effort to a vehicle that is structurally incapable of taking them where they want to go. They work harder in a job, not realizing that the job structure itself caps their income. They save more aggressively in a retirement plan, not questioning whether the timeline or the assumptions are aligned with the life they actually want to live. They optimize performance within a system rather than questioning whether the system itself is the right one. DeMarco uses a powerful metaphor here. He asks you to imagine wanting to drive from the east coast of a country to the west coast. You might drive extremely well. You might maintain perfect speed. You might follow all the rules of the road without a single error. But if you started driving north, no amount of driving excellence will get you to the western destination. Direction matters more than speed. Vehicle matters more than effort level. For investors, this insight translates into a critical practice. Regularly and honestly evaluate not just how hard you are working at your investment strategy, but whether the strategy itself is capable of producing the outcome you want. If your goal is to build meaningful wealth within a decade, and you are exclusively invested in low-yield savings instruments, you are driving north. The effort you put into managing that strategy is largely irrelevant because the vehicle cannot deliver the destination. Now let us explore what DeMarco calls the wealth triad of producer, consumer, and their relationship to value. This is a framework that fundamentally repositions how you see your role in the economy and in wealth creation. DeMarco argues that society functions with a division between producers and consumers. Consumers spend money on things that others have produced. Producers create, build, invest, and develop things that consumers buy. This seems obvious, but the implications run much deeper than the surface observation. In any transaction, the wealth flows toward the producer. The consumer exchanges money for value. The producer receives money in exchange for providing value. Over a lifetime of transactions, the person who is predominantly a consumer continuously transfers wealth to producers. The person who is predominantly a producer continuously accumulates wealth from consumers. This is not a cynical observation about exploitation. It is a structural observation about how money flows in a market economy, and it has a deeply practical implication. The most direct path to wealth is to shift your identity and your activity from primarily consumer to primarily producer. Not to stop consuming entirely, which would be neither practical nor desirable, but to ensure that your primary role in the economy is one that creates value and captures a portion of the value created. For investors, this framing is illuminating. When you invest in a business that creates value for consumers, you are on the producer side of that equation. Your capital is working as a productive force in the economy. When your investments grow, it is because the business is successfully creating value that consumers are willing to pay for. Understanding this reminds you to always evaluate investments not through the lens of financial mechanics alone, but through the lens of genuine value creation. The investments that last, that compound, that create real wealth over time are almost always the ones rooted in businesses that are genuinely creating value for real people. Imagine an investor who thinks about their portfolio not as a collection of ticker symbols or asset classes, but as a collection of productive enterprises that are serving specific human needs. When they evaluate a new opportunity, their first question is always, what value does this create, and for whom? When they assess the health of an existing investment, they look not just at price performance, but at whether the underlying business is still genuinely serving its customers well. This investor is thinking like a producer. And over time, that thinking produces materially different results. Let us now go deeper into the psychology of wealth, because DeMarco dedicates meaningful space to the mental and emotional patterns that determine financial outcomes, at least as much as strategy or knowledge. He introduces the concept of a wealth mindset not as a motivational abstraction, but as a specific cluster of beliefs and cognitive habits that distinguish people who build wealth from people who struggle with money, regardless of their income level. The distinction is real and measurable. People with the same income, the same education, and the same opportunities consistently end up in dramatically different financial positions over time. The variable that explains most of that difference is not luck. It is the way they think about money, opportunity, risk, and time. One of the central psychological patterns DeMarco identifies is what he calls reactive versus responsive financial behavior. Reactive financial behavior is driven by emotion, by fear, excitement, social pressure, or the desire for immediate comfort. Someone who makes a financial decision because everyone around them seems to be doing it, or because a financial media program created urgency, or because the thought of missing out produced anxiety, is behaving reactively. These reactive decisions almost always serve the short term at the expense of the long term, and they consistently generate below-average financial outcomes. Responsive financial behavior is different. It is driven by deliberate analysis, by clear goals, by an understanding of what each decision contributes to or detracts from the overall wealth-building strategy. It is calm, where reactive is anxious. It is patient, where reactive is impulsive. It is creative, where reactive is conventional. The investor who responds rather than reacts sees market volatility as information and opportunity rather than as crisis and threat. They are not unmoved by the emotion, but they have learned not to be governed by it. This distinction matters enormously in practical investing. Think about the behavior of market participants during a significant market downturn. Reactive investors see falling prices and feel fear. That fear generates a powerful impulse to sell, to stop the pain, to move to safety. And many of them act on that impulse, selling at the bottom and locking in losses that they then refuse to acknowledge by staying out of the market during the subsequent recovery. They experience the full downside and miss the full upside. This is reactive investing, and it systematically destroys wealth over time. The responsive investor sees the same falling prices and asks a different set of questions. Are the fundamental businesses I am invested in still creating real value? Has something structural changed in these companies? Or am I simply watching market emotion manifest as price movement? If the businesses are sound and prices have fallen primarily due to market sentiment rather than fundamental deterioration, does this represent an opportunity to acquire more of something valuable at a lower price? This is how fortunes are made during market downturns, by those who can manage their emotional response well enough to see clearly what is actually happening. This is not about being fearless. It is about being trained and intentional enough to not let fear override rational analysis at the exact moments when rational analysis is most valuable. DeMarco also addresses something that very few financial books discuss honestly, which is the role of environment and identity in financial outcomes. He argues that the people around you, the culture you are embedded in, and the identity you carry about yourself as a financial being all have a profound influence on your financial results. If the people closest to you see money as scarce, as something that is always running out, as a source of stress and conflict, those beliefs enter your thinking and shape your behavior in ways that are often below conscious awareness. Similarly, if your identity is bound up with being a certain kind of person, perhaps someone who is not a business person, or someone who is not good with money, or someone from a background where wealth was not part of the expected story, then your behavior will consistently align with that identity, even when you are consciously trying to change your financial outcomes. The identity becomes the ceiling. This is not abstract psychology. It is a practical reality that every investor and entrepreneur needs to take seriously. The work of building wealth is partly technical and strategic, but it is equally, perhaps more, a work of examining and deliberately updating the beliefs, stories, and identities that determine what you will actually do when the strategy meets real life. If you are starting today, spend time honestly examining the stories you carry about money, wealth, and your own financial potential. Notice where those stories came from. Notice whether they are serving you or limiting you. And begin the deliberate process of replacing the ones that do not serve you with ones that do. This is not positive thinking as a substitute for strategy. This is clearing the psychological ground so that the right strategy can actually take root and grow. Now let us move into the practical machinery of the fast lane, because understanding the philosophy is only valuable if it translates into concrete action. DeMarco lays out specific categories of businesses and income structures that he considers genuine fast lane vehicles. And while the specific examples he gives reflect his own time and background, the underlying logic applies universally and across different economic environments around the world. The first category is internet-based business. DeMarco wrote this book during a period when the internet was already well established as a commercial platform, but many people still did not fully grasp its implications for wealth creation. The core insight is that the internet removes geographic constraints from economic activity. A business that operates online can in principle serve customers anywhere on Earth without maintaining physical infrastructure in each location. This dramatically lowers the cost of scale and dramatically increases the potential reach of any product or service. For investors and entrepreneurs in global markets, this observation has never been more relevant than it is today. The infrastructure of digital commerce is more developed, more accessible, and more affordable than at any point in history. A small team in any part of the world can build, distribute, and collect revenue from a digital product that reaches customers on every continent. The barriers to entry in many digital categories are genuinely low. But the commandment of entry reminds us that this also means those categories are competitive. The opportunity is in finding the specific angle, the specific underserved need, or the specific level of quality within a space that creates a meaningful barrier despite the low general entry cost. The second category is innovation. DeMarco is talking here about creating something genuinely new, a new product, a new solution, a new combination of existing elements that serves a need in a way that has not been done before. Innovation is the highest risk and potentially highest reward path in the fast lane because it operates in spaces where there is no established market to reference, no proven playbook to follow. But when innovation succeeds, when a genuinely new solution finds its market, the financial returns can be extraordinary precisely because there is no competition in that exact space yet. For investors, the ability to identify genuine innovation early is one of the most valuable skills in existence. The investor who can distinguish between authentic innovation that solves a real problem in a meaningfully better way and superficial novelty dressed up as innovation will consistently find asymmetric opportunities. This skill is not mystical. It is developed through deep knowledge of specific industries, through close attention to customer behavior and pain, through understanding technology trajectories, and through the disciplined application of the Five Commandments to every opportunity evaluated. The third category is intentional iteration. This is perhaps the most accessible path for the majority of investors and entrepreneurs. Intentional iteration means taking something that already exists, something with a proven market, and making it genuinely better in a specific and meaningful way. You are not starting from scratch. You are not hoping to invent something entirely new. You are studying what exists, identifying specific gaps or weaknesses in how the need is currently being served, and building an improved version that serves the same or adjacent customer base more effectively. This approach has several structural advantages. The market already exists, which answers the commandment of need. If you are improving something that people already buy, you know the need is real. The competitive dynamics are visible, which allows informed evaluation of the commandment of entry. You can identify what barriers exist and whether you can build a differentiated position. And the path to revenue validation is typically faster than pure innovation because you are not waiting for a new market to form. Imagine a small investor looking at a specific software category used by a particular type of business. He uses several existing tools in that category and, through careful observation, identifies that they all handle a specific workflow in a way that is unnecessarily complicated and time-consuming. He builds a tool that handles that specific workflow elegantly and simply. He does not try to replace the entire category. He finds one specific thing that can be meaningfully improved and focuses all his energy there. That focused improvement becomes the core of a valuable and scalable business. If you are starting today, rather than trying to invent something entirely new, look for something that already has customers and that you genuinely believe can be done significantly better. Study the existing solutions deeply. Use them personally if possible. Talk to people who use them about their frustrations. Find the specific thing that, if fixed, would make a meaningful difference. That is your entry point. Now DeMarco addresses one of the most emotionally charged concepts in wealth building, which is the relationship between risk and wealth creation. Most people have been taught to think about risk primarily as something to be avoided. Safety is good. Risk is bad. The financially responsible person is the one who minimizes exposure to risk. This belief feels prudent and responsible. But it has a hidden cost that almost nobody discusses openly. The cost of avoiding risk is opportunity. Every decision to stay safe is simultaneously a decision not to pursue the potential upside of the riskier path. This seems obvious when stated plainly. But in practice, most people dramatically underestimate the cost of excessive risk aversion and dramatically overestimate the probability and severity of the worst-case outcomes they are trying to avoid. DeMarco makes a distinction between reckless risk and calculated risk. Reckless risk is what happens when you make significant financial commitments without adequate knowledge, without validated assumptions, without a plan, and without the ability to absorb a bad outcome. Calculated risk is what happens when you have done serious work to understand the opportunity, validated the critical assumptions as much as possible before committing, designed your position size in proportion to your confidence and your ability to absorb loss, and accepted the remaining uncertainty as the cost of the potential return. The wealthy do not avoid risk. They learn to manage it intelligently. They build knowledge that reduces the gap between what they know and what they do not know about any given opportunity. They diversify across multiple opportunities so that no single failure is catastrophic. They maintain liquidity so that they have the ability to act when good opportunities arise unexpectedly, or to survive when bad outcomes materialize. And they develop the psychological fortitude to act decisively under conditions of incomplete information, which is the only kind of information that exists in the real world. This is where most beginners make another critical error. They confuse analysis paralysis with caution. They spend enormous amounts of time researching, deliberating, and waiting for certainty that never comes. Meanwhile, others who are equally or less informed, but more psychologically prepared to act under uncertainty, are capturing the opportunities that the overanalyzers are still studying. Perfect information does not exist. The investor who waits for it waits forever. The investor who learns to act confidently on good but incomplete information while managing downside intelligently is the one who actually builds wealth. Imagine two investors looking at the same early-stage opportunity. The first investor spends 4 months conducting due diligence and then decides they need more time to feel comfortable. By the time they are ready to act, the opportunity has filled its investment round and is no longer available. The second investor conducts rigorous due diligence over 3 weeks, makes a considered decision to invest at a size proportionate to their uncertainty, and moves. The outcome of the investment might be the same for both of them if the first investor eventually finds another route in. But in practice, the first investor will repeat this pattern across dozens of opportunities and consistently miss the ones that require timely action. Over time, this habit of hesitation is itself a form of financial loss. Let us now move into what DeMarco calls the execution gap, which may be the single most important practical concept for investors and entrepreneurs to understand. The execution gap is the distance between knowing what to do and actually doing it. It is the space where most plans live and most wealth dies. DeMarco is direct about this. The knowledge of how to build wealth is not rare. Books like the one being summarized here have been available for years. Courses, mentors, case studies, and frameworks for wealth creation are more accessible today than at any point in human history. If knowledge were the primary barrier, we would expect to see far more wealthy people than we do. The barrier is not knowledge. The barrier is execution. And specifically, consistent execution over an extended period in the face of difficulty, uncertainty, and the natural human desire to take the path of least resistance. Execution requires something that is deeper and more sustainable than motivation. Motivation is emotional and fluctuating. It peaks when you first encounter an inspiring idea and gradually fades as the work becomes routine and difficult. The investor or entrepreneur who runs on motivation will work intensely in bursts and then plateau or stop when the emotional energy runs low. This pattern is extremely common, and it explains why so many people start projects they do not finish, make commitments they do not keep, and reach for results they never quite grasp. What DeMarco argues for instead is a commitment structure. A commitment structure is an external and internal framework that keeps you executing the right actions regardless of your emotional state on any given day. It includes clear, specific goals that are more compelling than the comfort of inaction. It includes systems and habits that make the right behaviors automatic rather than effortful. It includes accountability, whether to a partner, a community, or a clearly articulated personal standard. And it includes a deep understanding of why the goal matters, not as a slogan, but as a viscerally felt answer to the question of what kind of life you actually want to be living. For investors, the commitment structure shows up most clearly in the discipline around investment strategy. Everyone has a strategy in calm markets. The test of a commitment structure is whether the strategy holds under pressure, when prices are falling, when results are disappointing, when the news cycle is generating fear, and when everyone around you is panicking. The investor who has genuinely committed to a strategy at a level deeper than conscious motivation will maintain it through these periods and ultimately be rewarded for the consistency. The investor who is relying on motivation will capitulate at the worst possible moments. DeMarco also addresses the role of failure in the Fastlane journey, and his treatment of this topic is both realistic and ultimately empowering. He does not romanticize failure. He does not say failure is always a gift. He acknowledges that failure is genuinely painful, that it costs real resources, real time, real emotional energy. But he argues that the fear of failure, specifically the culturally instilled belief that failure is shameful and should be avoided at almost any cost, is one of the primary mechanisms that keeps people trapped in the slow lane. When failure is treated as shameful, people avoid the risks that might lead to it. And since significant wealth creation almost always requires taking significant risks, the fear of failure becomes the fear of wealth. People unconsciously avoid the very actions that could lead to the outcomes they consciously desire. This is one of the most painful ironies in the psychology of financial life. The antidote is not to pretend failure does not hurt. The antidote is to develop a relationship with failure that allows you to treat it as information rather than as judgment. Each failure, if examined honestly, contains specific lessons about what assumptions were wrong, what actions were ineffective, and what the next attempt should do differently. The investor who fails and learns is not losing. They are paying tuition. The investor who fails and avoids the learning, who simply moves on without extracting the lesson, is wasting the payment. Some of the world's most successful investors and entrepreneurs have extensive failure histories. What distinguishes them from those who failed and disappeared is not that they failed less. It is that they failed faster, recovered faster, learned more efficiently, and continued forward without letting the identity damage accumulate to the point where it stopped their progress. Think about the startup ecosystem in any major technology hub. The investors and founders who thrive in that environment over the long term are almost uniformly people who have experienced significant failure. Their first company did not work. Their second investment thesis was wrong. Their third attempt at a product found no market traction. But they processed those experiences, updated their models, and came back more capable and more informed. The failures were not wasted. They were the curriculum. If you are starting today, give yourself explicit permission to fail, provided that you are failing on experiments, not on your entire financial foundation. The practice of separating learning investments, small bets designed to test specific hypotheses, from core financial reserves, is what allows you to pursue aggressive fast-lane strategies without exposing yourself to catastrophic downside. Test your assumptions cheaply before committing significantly. Move fast in the early stages when the cost of being wrong is low. Move carefully when you are committing larger resources based on validated learning. Now, let us explore what DeMarco says about the relationship between lifestyle and wealth building, because this is an area where conventional financial wisdom and fast-lane thinking diverge significantly, and the difference has important implications for how you live during the building phase. The conventional slow-lane advice tells you to live as frugally as possible, to deny yourself present pleasures in order to maximize the capital available for saving and investing. This advice is not entirely wrong. There is a genuine relationship between spending discipline and investment capacity. But DeMarco points out that taken to its logical extreme, this approach conflates the means with the end. You are not building wealth in order to live a future life of deprivation. You are building wealth in order to live a better life. The frugality should be purposeful and strategic, not a moral value in itself. More importantly, DeMarco argues that a life of aggressive deprivation during the building phase is psychologically unsustainable for most people and therefore strategically counterproductive. The investor who never allows themselves any present reward from their building activity will eventually exhaust their motivation and either abandon the strategy entirely or resent the wealth they do build because it came at the cost of years of joyless self-denial. The fast-lane approach is different. It says that the goal is not to minimize spending. The goal is to accelerate income and asset growth dramatically enough that you can afford both a reasonable quality of present life and an aggressive wealth-building program simultaneously. The race is not to see how little you can spend. The race is to build income and assets fast enough that the trade-off becomes increasingly irrelevant. This is why the fast lane focuses so intensely on the income side of the equation rather than the expense side. Expense optimization has a ceiling. There is a minimum below which you cannot reduce spending without damaging your health, your relationships, your productivity, or your well-being. But income generation has no ceiling. Revenue from a well-built business or investment portfolio has no theoretical maximum. The leverage, therefore, is much greater on the income side. Every hour spent building a scalable income vehicle has more potential return than every hour spent cutting expenses. For investors, this translates into a clear priority. Before obsessing over minimizing fees, tax optimization, and expense ratios, which matter at scale but are secondary in the early stage, focus first on building the income and capital base that gives you significant material to work with. A strategy that saves you 2% of a small portfolio while limiting your focus on growing that portfolio is misallocating your most valuable resource, which is your cognitive attention. DeMarco also explores what he calls the difference between events and processes. This distinction is psychologically important because most of the stories we tell about wealth creation, the legendary overnight successes, the unicorn exits, the viral launches, are stories about events, the visible moment of dramatic success. What those stories almost always omit is the process, the long, invisible period of building, failing, adjusting, and persisting that preceded the event by months or years. When people consume only the event stories, they develop a distorted picture of how wealth is actually created. They expect an event. They wait for the breakthrough moment. They look for the one big deal, the one great investment, the one perfect product launch that will transform everything. And while waiting for that event, they underinvest in the process, the daily discipline, the steady compounding of knowledge and systems and relationships that actually produce the event when it eventually comes. The process is the real work. The event is the result. And the process is rarely glamorous. It is early mornings and detailed spreadsheets and customer conversations and repeated iterations and moments of genuine doubt. The investor who embraces the process, who finds meaning and engagement in the daily work of building, rather than simply tolerating it as a means to an eventual event, is the one who consistently produces the events that others admire from the outside. Imagine a real estate investor who builds a portfolio of cash-flowing properties over 15 years. From the outside, the event looks like a wealthy person who owns a large portfolio of real estate. From the inside, the process was 15 years of studying markets, analyzing deals, managing renovations, navigating difficult tenants, refinancing at strategic moments, reinvesting cash flow, and maintaining the discipline to hold quality assets through market cycles when selling might have felt more comfortable. The wealth is visible. The 15-year process that created it is invisible, and the people who see only the wealth often overestimate the role of luck and underestimate the role of sustained, intelligent process. DeMarco returns again and again to the theme of value creation as the bedrock of sustainable wealth, and it is worth spending additional time here, because this is where his framework has perhaps the deepest implications for how investors evaluate opportunities and build portfolios. He argues that there are two kinds of financial activity that look superficially similar but are fundamentally different. The first is genuine value creation, building, investing in, or developing things that genuinely make people's lives better in some specific, measurable way. The second is value extraction, finding ways to take a portion of value that others have created without contributing meaningfully to its creation. Now, this is not a moralistic distinction. It is a strategic one. Value creation is sustainable because the market continuously rewards those who create genuine value with continued revenue, customer loyalty, and competitive advantage. Value extraction is not sustainable because markets, over time, route around entities that are extracting value without creating it. They find alternatives. They build competing solutions. They stop paying for things that do not genuinely serve their interests. For investors, the implication is to consistently favor investments in genuine value creators over investments in value extractors. A business that serves its customers so well that those customers actively recommend it to others, return repeatedly, and would feel a real loss if it disappeared, is a fundamentally different quality of investment than a business that captures customer attention through manipulation, lock-in effects, or information asymmetry that benefits the business at the customer's expense. The first type is building compounding competitive advantage. The second type is sitting on a fragile foundation that will eventually erode. The investment landscape is full of apparently profitable businesses that are actually in the second category. They generate strong financial metrics for a period. They attract capital. They look impressive from a distance, but they are extracting rather than creating, and the clock is always running on that model. The investor who has developed the skill to distinguish genuine value creation from sophisticated value extraction will consistently make better long-term investment decisions than one who relies primarily on financial metrics alone. Let us now address something that DeMarco raises toward the latter part of the book that is specifically and powerfully relevant to the globally minded investor. The concept of limiting beliefs as they relate to geography, background, and context. Many investors and entrepreneurs in markets outside the traditionally wealthy centers of the world carry an implicit belief that the fast lane as described is primarily available to those in certain places with access to certain networks and certain currencies. This belief is understandable, given the history of global capital flows and the way that opportunity has historically been geographically concentrated. But it is increasingly and demonstrably false. The digital economy has reduced the role of geography in wealth creation more dramatically than any other development in economic history. The entrepreneur building a software product in Lagos, in Jakarta, in Nairobi, or in Bogota has access to the same global customer base, the same cloud infrastructure, the same distribution platforms, and much of the same knowledge base as the entrepreneur in San Francisco. The cost of reaching that global customer base may actually be lower in many cases because operating costs are lower and talent costs are dramatically lower in many of these markets. The global investor who understands this is positioned to see opportunities that the traditionally Western-focused investor completely misses. Markets that are underpenetrated by digital solutions, demographics that are rapidly growing in purchasing power, problems that exist at enormous scale in developing economies that are only beginning to attract sophisticated entrepreneurial and investment attention. The fast lane is global, and in some ways, the most compelling fast lane opportunities in the coming decades may be found precisely in the places that have historically been on the economic periphery. This is why this matters in real investing. The global investor who brings genuine expertise in a specific domain, combined with deep local knowledge of a specific market, and combines these with fast lane principles of scale, control, value creation, and time leverage, is operating in a space that very few people are currently occupying. That combination of factors is a genuine and significant competitive advantage. If you are starting today in a market outside the traditional investment centers, do not wait for conditions to resemble those of more developed markets before applying fast lane principles. The principles translate. The vehicles may look different. The specific technologies, platforms, and structures available to you may differ from those in a Silicon Valley context. But the underlying logic of solving real problems at scale, building systems rather than just trading time, creating genuine value, and maintaining control over the critical variables. This logic applies universally because it is not based on a specific geography. It is based on timeless economic reality. Now DeMarco addresses what happens after significant wealth is built, and this section is often underemphasized in summaries of the book, but is genuinely important for the long-term investor and wealth builder to understand. He talks about the importance of protecting wealth once it has been created, and the specific psychological challenges that arise in that phase. Many people who successfully build significant wealth in the fast lane subsequently lose a substantial portion of it through a combination of overconfidence, lifestyle inflation, poor capital allocation decisions, and the psychological disorientation that can accompany a dramatic change in financial status. The skills and mindsets that build wealth are not identical to the skills and mindsets that protect and grow it. And this mismatch is responsible for a significant portion of the stories we hear about people who built fortunes and then lost them. DeMarco advocates for a transition from aggressive wealth building mode to what he calls intelligent wealth preservation and continued growth. This transition requires developing a new set of skills, specifically around capital allocation, risk management at scale, diversification across asset classes, and the governance structures that protect large pools of capital from both external threats and internal decision-making errors. One of the specific risks he highlights is the tendency of newly wealthy individuals to make large investment decisions in areas outside their expertise, driven by overconfidence, born from their success in one specific domain. The entrepreneur who built wealth by being extraordinarily good at software product development may not be equally well positioned to make sound judgments about commercial real estate, commodity investments, or private equity in industries far removed from their experience. The track record in one domain does not automatically transfer to others, and the confidence it generates can actually increase risk by reducing the caution that would otherwise trigger deeper diligence. The practice of staying within your circle of competence, investing most aggressively in areas where you have genuine depth of knowledge and defensible edge, and treating excursions outside that circle with much greater humility and much smaller position sizes is not a limitation. It is a protection. And for investors who have worked hard to build significant capital, protecting that capital from avoidable errors is at least as important as continuing to grow it. This is where most successful early-stage wealth builders make a critical error. They assume that the confidence and capability that produced their initial wealth generalizes broadly. They stop treating new domains with the beginner's humility that would serve them well. And they make large, poorly researched commitments in areas where they lack the deep knowledge that protected them in their original domain. The result is often a painful and avoidable reduction in the wealth they worked so hard to build. If you are approaching this transition, the practice of deliberately and systematically expanding your competence circle before expanding your investment activity in a new domain is one of the highest return disciplines available to you. Spend 6 months deeply studying an industry before investing significantly in it. Build relationships with people who have domain expertise that complements yours. Read the best books, the primary research, the case studies of both success and failure in that space. By the time you deploy meaningful capital, you want to be among the more knowledgeable investors in that specific area, not a tourist making decisions based on surface-level pattern matching. Let us now bring together the threads of this entire framework with what DeMarco calls the Declaration of Financial Independence. This is not a specific legal or technical document. It is a philosophical commitment that he invites the reader to make to themselves. It is the decision, fully conscious and fully owned, to stop accepting the financial life that was handed to you by default and to begin deliberately designing the financial life that you actually want. This declaration involves several specific components. First, it involves an honest assessment of where you currently are financially and how you got there. Not to assign blame or generate guilt, but to see clearly what patterns and decisions have produced your current reality. Second, it involves a clear and specific articulation of the financial outcome you are working toward. Not a vague aspiration like, I want to be wealthy, but a specific, time-bounded vision of what your financial life looks like when it is what you want it to be. Third, it involves an honest evaluation of the vehicle you are currently using and whether it is capable of getting you to that destination within the time frame that aligns with the life you want to live. Fourth, it involves identifying the specific changes in behavior, knowledge, and strategy that the gap between your current vehicle and your required vehicle demands. This is not a one-time exercise. It is a living practice. The investor who regularly and honestly revisits these questions, who adjusts their strategy as they learn, who remains flexible in their tactics while committed to their vision, is the one who consistently makes progress regardless of the obstacles they encounter. DeMarco ends his framework with something that might surprise readers who expected a purely financial text. He talks about purpose, not in a vague motivational sense, but in a very practical sense. He argues that wealth building, without a genuine answer to the question of why this matters to you, is both unsustainable and ultimately unsatisfying. The discipline required to walk the fast lane through its inevitable difficulties is hard to maintain when the only answer to why you are doing it is to have more money. Money is not a compelling enough answer when things get hard. But when the answer is more specific, when it is about the freedom to be present for your family in ways that employment never allowed, or to support a specific cause that matters deeply to you, or to create security for people you love, or to build something that continues to create value beyond your own lifetime, then the difficulty of the path is contextualized by the significance of the destination. The difficulty does not disappear, but it becomes meaningful rather than merely painful. For the investor, this means that understanding your own why is not a soft, optional addition to your financial strategy. It is a core component of the strategy itself, because it determines how you will behave during the periods of your journey that are difficult, confusing, and unrewarding in visible ways. And there will be such periods. They are not exceptions. They are standard features of the wealth-building journey. The investor who knows why they are building will navigate those periods differently and more effectively than the one who is building purely from a financial motivation that the difficulty can erode. Let us now revisit the full arc of the Fastlane philosophy with the eyes of someone who has moved through all its layers. You began by questioning the default financial narrative that most people never question. You saw the structural limitations of the sidewalk, the hidden costs of the slow lane, and the possibility of the fast lane. You understood that the fast lane is not a shortcut, but a different road, one that requires more courage and more deliberate skill building than the slow lane, but that is capable of delivering genuine wealth and freedom within a time frame that actually aligns with a fully lived life. You learned that wealth is not created by working harder within a limited vehicle. It is created by choosing the right vehicle, one that can scale, that solves real needs, that you control, that is protected by a meaningful barrier, and that increasingly operates without requiring your constant personal time. You understood that the producer mindset is the foundation of wealth creation, and that the shift from consumer identity to producer identity is one of the most profound and profitable changes a person can make. You saw that the psychology of wealth is at least as important as the strategy, that reactive versus responsive behavior, that the management of fear, greed, impatience, and overconfidence, that the stories you carry about your own potential, these are not peripheral concerns. They are central determinants of financial outcome. The investor who masters these psychological dimensions has an advantage that no amount of additional information can provide to someone who has not done this work. You understood that execution is the gap where most plans die, and that building a commitment structure, rather than relying on fluctuating motivation, is what bridges that gap. You saw that failure is not the enemy of wealth, but its tutor, provided that the lessons are extracted and applied with discipline and honesty. You understood that the process creates the events, and that investing your primary attention and energy in the daily process, rather than waiting for the transformative event, is what consistently produces the results that look extraordinary from the outside. You learned that the fast lane is not geographically limited, that the principles apply universally, that the global investor and entrepreneur who combines deep local knowledge with fast lane thinking is operating in one of the most underexploited spaces in the modern economy. And you understood that building wealth is only half the work, that protecting and wisely growing what you have built requires a different skill set and a different kind of humility than the aggressive building phase demanded. And finally, you understood that all of this, every framework, every commandment, every psychological discipline, every strategic insight, is only meaningful in service of a life well lived. The purpose of wealth is freedom. Freedom of time, freedom of choice, freedom to contribute in the ways that matter most to you. The fast lane is a road to that freedom. But the freedom itself is what makes the journey worth taking. For the investor who is ready to truly internalize these ideas and begin applying them with genuine seriousness, the path forward starts with one honest conversation with yourself. Not about the market, not about the best asset class, not about the most promising sector. The conversation starts with this question: am I driving on a road that can actually take me where I want to go? And if not, what is the first real step toward finding the one that can? The answer to that question, pursued with courage and consistency, is the beginning of the fast lane.